Hello and welcome back to my Super Monkey Ball review marathon, where so far in the series we've taken a look at Super Monkey Ball Banana Blitz HD, Super Monkey Ball Deluxe, and the original Super Monkey Ball for the GameCube. I'm fully aware that we've done things in a bit of a weird order so far, but from here on out we're going to take things chronologically in the order the games were released. If you want to watch any of the previous videos in the series, I'll leave links to them in the description, and I've also made a Super Monkey Ball playlist on the channel too, so it should be pretty easy to find. For now though, we're moving on and we're taking a look at what is potentially most people's favourite game in the series, Super Monkey Ball 2 for the GameCube. Super Monkey Ball 2 was once again developed by Amusement Vision, the same team that worked on the first game, and it was released in 2002 exclusively for the GameCube. If you've watched my video on the first game, you'll already pretty much know what to expect here, so I'm not going to go too in-depth about the basic idea of the game or anything. The controls, graphics and music are just as high quality as they were back in the original game, being a really polished and satisfying overall experience. But come on, this is supposed to be a full-blown sequel. There must be more this game adds, I hear you ask. And yeah, the game does actually make quite a few changes from the original game, which are pretty significant improvements. Firstly, the game now runs in widescreen, which is actually a relatively rare thing for a GameCube game to do. So that's a really nice detail and it gives you a full screen Monkey Ball experience. It's a bit weird how the very edges of the screen aren't filled, but still, it covers 95% of a widescreen TV, so it can be forgiven. Each and every level in the game now has an actual name, which is another nice detail because in the original Super Monkey Ball they were just assigned numbers, whereas now they're made more memorable and given more personality with names like Arthropod, Totalitarianism, or Organic Forms. It's cool stuff and it makes all the levels stand apart from each other. There's now quite a few more levels too, all of which are original and made specifically for this game. Which I know is probably obvious with this being a sequel, but what might not be as obvious is that they introduced several new gimmicks into the new levels, which vary in quality quite drastically. Firstly, we have these switches which change the way the levels move. Sometimes freezing elements of the level in place, or maybe reversing them or slowing them down. The thing is with this though is that despite being used interestingly in a couple of levels, most of the time these switches aren't put to very good use and you start a stage by landing on a switch that makes the level's obstacles faster, which then forces you to turn around and press another switch to make the level play in normal speed. And it's not just one level that does this, there's so many examples of this exact same gimmick being used, and it just feels like a bit of a waste of time and ruins the flow by having you constantly turning around at the start of a level just to play it normally. I actually generally don't like this switch mechanic, and I think it's only used interestingly a couple of times. I mean, there's a level involving these switches which is literally trial and error, where to make the goal reachable, you have to press the right switch to open it. However, there's like a million switches and pretty much all of them just instantly kill you. It's utterly rubbish. This isn't to say that the switches aren't a good idea. I think if they were utilised in the right way, they could have actually worked really well, but unfortunately, this game doesn't really do that. Then we have these teleportation gates, which in my opinion are used to way better effect than the switches. But at the same time, I personally could do without them. They aren't used interestingly enough or consistently enough to really make too much of a difference to the way that the levels play. But they don't get in the way either, so I guess I don't really care. Probably the most interesting use of this I've seen is this level where you go down a ramp into a teleporter, which then takes you to the top of the ramp again, and you're then able to get to the goal, which was too far up the ramp to reach before. Other than that, we have this single level which uses these invisible platforms, and you have to remember where they were before they disappeared and basically make your way through a maze while remembering where the safe areas are. This is actually really interesting, but at the same time it could have gotten really annoying, so I'm glad it was only in one level. Another thing which is new to this game is this seesaw mechanic, where some levels will have you stand on one side of a platform and it will tilt because of your weight. so you'll have to balance the platform by shifting from one side to another. This is actually really good, and it's used interestingly throughout the game and is easily my favourite of the new things this game brings to the table. It just fits with the normal Monkey Ball gameplay insanely well. Another major thing this game adds into the Super Monkey Ball experience is a full-blown story mode featuring a unique progression system and cutscenes. If you've seen my review of Super Monkey Ball Deluxe, then you already know what this story mode is, because it's exactly the same. The cutscenes are identical, and the only real difference is that because Deluxe has all of the levels from both Super Monkey Ball 1 and 2, there's a selection of 20 levels per world, and to progress to the next world, you only needed to clear half of them. Whereas in Super Monkey Ball 2, there's 10 levels per world, and you need to clear all of them to progress. Which makes it much harder because you can't skip levels you're struggling on. I actually prefer the way Deluxe handles this, but Super Monkey Ball 2 couldn't really do that because it has nowhere near the amount of levels that Deluxe has. So it's understandable that you couldn't skip any of them. The story mode lasted me around 4.5 hours, which is fairly substantial, and something I enjoyed about it was that it actually had a couple of unique levels that aren't playable in any other mode. The main thing that kept me playing this mode though was the ridiculous story which progresses as you move from world to world. It's basically about an evil villain called Dr. Bad Boon who steals all of the bananas from the village where I, Mimi, Baby and Gongon live. And by using a magical spell which creates a ball around them, they chase down Dr. Bad Boon and get into all sorts of ridiculous scenarios. They're eaten by a whale, they're shrunk by Dr. Bad Boon, and in order to get him to return them to the correct size, they hide in his clothes while he's in a spa and then tickle him until he agrees to help them. Then at one point Dr. Bad Boon creates an army of robot eyes to steal any remaining bananas and make the other people in the village think it's Eye behind the theft. And then in the game's climax, Dr. Bad Boon reaches his spaceship where he uses a laser beam to make all bananas taste like curry, so all the monkeys will starve to death because they apparently hate curry, I guess. It's honestly absolutely insane, and there's this ongoing subplot where Dr. Bad Boon is trying to marry Mimi and acts like an absolute creep, and I love it. The gameplay in the story mode is maybe a little bit underwhelming because it basically just feels like a practice mode because you have infinite lives to get through the levels and there's no penalty for dying. Once you've finished it, there's really no reason to go back to it, and you don't even unlock anything for doing it. That is, apart from a new track that plays on the main menu, which is actually pretty good. But I would have appreciated a way to change it back to the original music, or maybe even unlocking a sound test menu where you could listen to all of the music in the game would have been an even better reward. But really, the main attraction of Super Monkey Ball isn't the story mode, but the challenge mode, where you need to complete a set of levels as fast as possible, and while dying as few times as possible too. This is where Super Monkey Ball really shines, and to me is the main mode of the game. You have 3 difficulties which feature not only more levels, but also harder levels as you go higher in difficulty, and by completing each difficulty without losing a continue, you unlock a set of 10 extra levels for each difficulty, which is a really cool reward. I would have liked to have been able to play these 10 extra levels as their own difficulty, so for example when you've cleared them all normally, another difficulty could have opened up on the menu called Beginner Extra or something. but as it stands, the only way of playing them is by going through the entire difficulty without losing a continue, or by going into the practice mode once you've reached them in the normal mode. Super Monkey Ball 2 features a master difficulty which is unlocked if you can clear not only the expert difficulty, but the extra expert levels without losing a continue. And while this may seem absolutely insane, it's actually not that bad, and here's why. Remember the play point system that I really liked in Super Monkey Ball 1, where you earn an in-game currency for playing the main mode of the game? Well, it's back in Super Monkey Ball 2, and it's been greatly expanded, having more minigames to unlock, and after unlocking those, it has even more things to spend the points on. So you can get the story mode cutscenes to watch whenever you want, which is actually kinda pointless, and they're quite expensive too, being 1000 play points each. You can unlock the credits minigame to play whenever you want, which is really cool, and by the way is a totally different credits game to the one from Super Monkey Ball 1. This time taking place from an overhead view and having you move out of the way of the names scrolling by while collecting as many bananas and power-ups as possible. It's really cool. Despite this being really cool, you know what isn't cool? The name entry screen for when you get a high score for the leaderboards no longer has you roll around and hit into letters in an actual Monkey Ball stage like in Super Monkey Ball 1, but instead just has you cycle through letters and spell out your name in a traditional manner. Still, it's not all bad because we can enter more than 3 characters in Super Monkey Ball 2, so I guess that's forgiven. You know what one of my pet peeves about games is? When a game case has really cool spine art and then the sequel comes out and the art's completely different, making it look weird when the games are placed next to each other on a shelf. Like seriously, look at this. The first Super Monkey Ball had awesome spine art featuring the actual logo of the game, and then we move along to Super Monkey Ball 2 and it's just this stock font. But not only that, it's aligned to the left, whereas the original game's text was in the centre. I know most people wouldn't care about this, but come on, is it too much to ask for a bit of consistency with game cases? Anyway, by far the most important thing you can buy with play points is extra lives to use in the challenge mode of the game. This is different to Super Monkey Ball 1 where you could buy extra continues, because that didn't really make it any easier to unlock the extra levels, because the objective is to do it without losing a continue, so having more continues isn't useful. In Super Monkey Ball 2 though, having more lives effectively gives you way more chances to unlock the master difficulty, and the best news of all is that the extra lives aren't even very expensive, only being 500 play points per life. I really love this, and I also like how you have more things to spend the play points on too. Having said that though, I still think it's a huge missed opportunity to not have some unlockable cosmetic stuff. Like imagine being able to unlock Robot Eye as a skin, or maybe even the other monkeys seen in the game's story mode cutscene who appear to be living in the village. Or maybe they could have even let you unlock Dr. Badboon as a playable character. How awesome would that be? Before I move on to the multiplayer options this game has, I want to talk about my biggest issue with Super Monkey Ball 2, and that is simply I don't think the level design is as skill based as it was in Super Monkey Ball 1. And a lot of the time it either feels cheap or kinda just luck based. There's a few levels sprinkled into the game that I dread coming to because there just seems to be nothing you can do to pass them without a ton of struggling. One level where I feel this is Melting Pot, where you're placed in this square where other balls are rolling around and slam into you as the square itself moves left and right and the goal is placed opposite you. It always feels like absolute sheer luck when I get past this stage, and it's a bit annoying. Plus, why in God's name is this one of the only 2 levels in the entire game that has a 30-second time limit rather than a 60-second one? If it had had a 60-second time limit, I feel like I might be able to do it because I would have way more attempts at lining myself up with the goal. But no, they had to be idiots about it, didn't they? Another level I hate getting to is Arthropod, and while I don't think this is entirely based around luck, I think it's still sort of 10% luck even when you know what you're doing. Basically, you have to wait for the goal to rotate around this huge set of circles with gaps in between them, and then when it's visible, you have to bounce across the circles, clearing the gaps, and enter the goal. The issue is that there's this massive thing with loads of legs that's stomping around on the circles, and it's pretty much impossible to predict where its feet are gonna land. And if you hit into a foot, you're pretty much done for, either because it'll knock you off, or you'll just lose all of your speed and not be able to make it across the gaps. The most annoying thing about this level though is waiting for 20 seconds for the goal to actually appear for you to have another attempt. It makes it really annoying knowing that if you mess up or die because of bad luck here, you'll have to wait for so long to even have another attempt. Super Monkey Ball, more like Super Annoying Ball, am I right? So yeah, the levels are definitely not quite as consistently good as the ones from the original game. I feel like it always felt like my fault when I died in that game, but here, I sometimes felt like I was dying due to levels having elements of trial and error. But what I will say is that the vast majority of levels in Super Monkey Ball 2 are still really great, even if a lot of them do have silly switch mechanics. I think that about sums up the main modes of the game, but now let's move on to another important element of Super Monkey Ball, the multiplayer. Returning from Super Monkey Ball 1 is the ability to play the challenge mode of the game with friends by taking it in turns, and it's swapping players when you either complete a level or lose a life. This is still a really awesome multiplayer mode and I enjoy it a lot. However, I do have to question why you don't unlock play points for doing it in multiplayer. It makes no sense, you could just earn the same amount of play points as you would get doing it in single player, surely. Super Monkey Ball 1 did this as well, and I'm surprised they carried over this flaw to the second game. But let's face it, probably the main multiplayer element in this game comes from the party games, which are actually all in one menu this time, rather than pointlessly spread across two menus like in Super Monkey Ball 1. Awesome stuff. What's even more awesome though is that not only do all of the minigames from the first game return in the sequel and are even more expanded than what they were before, but there's also another 6 minigames that are new, doubling the amount of minigame content from the first game. From the start of the game, all 6 of the new minigames are locked and have to be purchased with play points. But I like this because it gives you something to aim for and you feel a sense of progression by unlocking them one at a time. I won't go into the minigames from the first game because I've already talked about them in my review of Super Monkey Ball 1, so let's dive into the new ones. First off, we have Monkey Tennis, which is seriously good, and the standard of these minigames is kept so high. I don't know how Super Monkey Ball keeps pulling this off, but Monkey Tennis is literally better than some full-on tennis games I've played. It offers a singles mode, doubles mode, and it also gives you lots of customization with match lengths. The game feels great too, and you have access to different hit styles which affect the ball in different ways, and it's just a really great time. Monkey Baseball is a good time too, but for some reason I'm really bad at it. One player throws themselves at the batter and they have to hit you across a field into pockets which represent how many bases you'll run. There's also some wacky elements thrown in, like these ramps that'll give you a home run if you go up them, and a wheel that'll affect the field in different ways too. We also have Monkey Soccer, which is pretty self-explanatory to be honest. You're either a defender or attacker depending on if you have the ball or not, and the objective is to shoot the ball into your opponent's goal. I pretty much just explained the rules of soccer, or as I call it, football, for no real reason, but yeah, this is soccer alright. Monkey Dogfight is kind of an interesting one. It's probably my least favourite of the whole roster of minigames, and the reason for that is that it just doesn't control all too well. It feels like you should turn and move up and down a lot quicker than what you do, but ignoring that, it's still a decent enough time. You fly around and have to shoot opponents with either your gun or your missiles, which you'll need to collect more of so they don't run out, and whoever gets the most hits wins. Monkey Shot basically replicates a light gun game, but instead of actually using a light gun, you just move a cursor around on the screen, which is obviously nowhere near as fun. Even so though, it's still pretty good, having loads of power-ups and enemies to shoot at, and even featuring multiple levels with boss battles at the end. It would have probably been a lot better as an actual light gun game though, but at the same time I understand why they didn't do that, because it would have been a bit weird them asking you to buy a peripheral just for this one minigame. Then finally we have Monkey Boat, where you have to paddle left and right to move the boat using the back buttons and race each other to the finish line while collecting power-ups to hit your opponents or make yourself faster. Think Mario Kart, but in a boat. I actually really like this one despite it being quite simple. It's pretty difficult though, and the computer players are really good. So yeah, all in all, this game has the original Super Monkey Ball beat in terms of content, having twice the amount of minigames which are all either good or really really good, and they all have loads of depth and content to dive into too. Plus, even the main game has quite a few more levels too, around 150 in total, whereas Super Monkey Ball 1 had approximately 125. Almost every mode returns in Super Monkey Ball 2 as well. However, there is one noticeable thing that doesn't return, and that's the simultaneous multiplayer mode that I wanted to see expanded into either a co-op mode or just a better version of what it already was. But no, the sequel just scraps it all together, which I don't think was the right decision to be honest, and it's a shame that it's not here. So I guess the overall question to ask ourselves here is Super Monkey Ball 2 better than Super Monkey Ball 1? The answer to this question, in my opinion, is no. I think the stages in Super Monkey Ball 1 are less gimmicky and way more skill-based, and I had a ton of fun getting better at the tougher stages in the first game, to the point where I can now do a lot of them on my first try. Super Monkey Ball 2 still has elements of this of course, but the way in which there's a couple of levels that are so much about luck, and how some levels use gimmicks that are completely unnecessary, kinda brings down the standard very slightly here. Other than that though, Super Monkey Ball 2 improves on almost everything from the first game. The playpoint system is made more in depth, which I love, although I still want to see unlockable characters and cosmetics. There's twice the amount of minigames, there's more levels, there's a story mode which is very entertaining, you can play the whole game in widescreen, and the controls, music and graphics are just as high quality as they were in the first game too. What I would say is that the two games complement each other extremely well, and you can almost just see them as being the same entity, like part 1 and 2 of the same product. If you haven't played either one of these, I can recommend them to pretty much anyone. They're just amazing games that aren't held in as high regard as they should be. Before I wrap this video up completely, I just want to address something that I've kind of been getting wrong in my previous reviews of the Super Monkey Ball series. I've kind of been talking trash about Super Monkey Ball Deluxe, saying that it's got worse loading times, a worse frame rate, worse graphics, and most importantly, worse controls, but it turns out that that might not be 100% true. You see, this is all true about the PS2 version of Super Monkey Ball Deluxe, and you should never play this version over the GameCube ones. It's literally a completely different experience, and I can't believe they even released the PS2 version given how much worse it is. However, there exists an Xbox version of Super Monkey Ball Deluxe, which I just assumed would have all of the flaws the PS2 version has. Well, silly me, because it turns out this isn't true, and the Xbox version runs at 60 frames per second, can be played in widescreen, has really great loading times, and has way better controls than the PS2 version as well. Basically, all of my complaints about Deluxe don't exist in the Xbox version, which therefore technically makes it the ultimate Super Monkey Ball game. Plus, you can play it on the Xbox 360 upscaled to HD, which is a nice bonus. At the time I'm recording this, it doesn't work on the Xbox One though, which is a huge shame. What I will say though is that I still would prefer playing the GameCube versions over this, and the reason for this is simply because I like having the play point system, which doesn't exist in Deluxe, and everything is pretty much unlocked from the start of the game. I would also say that the controls in the GameCube versions are still better than the Xbox version of Deluxe, but that could just be due to the GameCube controller having the octagon shape around the analog stick, making it easier to position yourself precisely. What is really damn cool about Deluxe is that if you clear all of the main modes of the game, you unlock a new difficulty called Ultimate Mode, which features 210 levels that you need to do all in a row. So this is pretty much every single level from Super Monkey Ball 1 and 2, as well as the new ones from Deluxe. Absolute insanity. It's really a shame that Deluxe never came out on the GameCube. I guess they just saw it as being unnecessary because 1 and 2 were already on there. Either that or the GameCube discs wouldn't have been able to have that many levels on them. But still, it really is a shame. I would have liked to have played it on the GameCube. So yeah, if you're hardcore into Super Monkey Ball, maybe pick up Deluxe for the Xbox, but avoid the PS2 version at all costs. I guess unless that's literally the only way you can play it, but even then, maybe don't bother. Whew, that was a lot to go through, but we got there in the end. The bottom line here is that Super Monkey Ball 1 and 2, and by extension the Xbox version of Super Monkey Ball Deluxe, are amazing games, and to me, are absolute classics and severely underrated. So I'm giving Super Monkey Ball 2, you know what? I'm not doing this anymore. The scoring system giving something a whatever out of 10 just isn't working for me anymore. It just doesn't make any sense when you compare scores across all the different games I've covered, because the reasons for giving each game its score can vary to such a huge extent. So instead, what I'm gonna do when I'm covering games across a particular series like this, is I'm gonna rank them from my favourite to least favourite. So here is my current ranking of the Super Monkey Ball games, with the best being at the top and the worst being at the bottom. So yeah, as I said before, I don't quite think Super Monkey Ball 2 is as good as the first game, but it's right next to it, and if I was still doing scores, it would be exactly the same. Because despite the levels not being as consistently good, the extra content featured in the game is way better. Not only is Super Monkey Ball 2 an amazing game with its main mode, but the minigames make this one of the very best party games ever made. Which is amazing considering the minigames aren't even the main focus of the game as a whole. It's incredible they pulled that off. Next time in the Super Monkey Ball series, we're going to be taking a look at potentially one of the most interesting games in the entire series. It's the very first handheld game and released literally just a few months after Super Monkey Ball 2. And that game is Super Monkey Ball Jr. for the Game Boy Advance. As always, if you enjoyed this video and you're looking forward to the next one, give this video a like and comment down below letting me know what your favourite Super Monkey Ball game in the series is and why. Also let me know if you agree that Super Monkey Ball 1 is better than Super Monkey Ball 2, because I think that's quite an unpopular opinion to have. Also subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this coming soon, and until the next video, bye!